"You're not invited." That's what she said. Not whispered, not muttered, but announced. Right there at the door, in front of everyone. Her voice didn't shake. Mine did. I stood there holding the tiny gift bag I'd spent hours preparing. A personalized note. A charm bracelet. A folded receipt still tucked inside that proved exactly who had paid the catering deposit 2 months earlier. And yet, I couldn't find a single word to say back. Behind her, the ballroom lights glowed like everything I thought I was part of. The soft music, the laughter, the scent of fresh lilies I specifically requested. I recognized my own touch. On every detail from the navy blue linens to the delicate embossed invitations, details she had once told me she was too stressed to deal with. So I dealt quietly, generously, because that's who I had always been. The behind-the-scenes fixer. The one who made things beautiful so others could shine. And now, here I was, uninvited from the very moment I had built from scratch. Her friends glanced over her shoulder, confused, curious. One of them even smiled apologetically, like they had just witnessed something mildly awkward, not a betrayal. Unfolding in real time, I could feel my cheeks burn, not from shame, but from the cruel absurdity of it all. This wasn't just exclusion, it was erasure. Deliberate, practiced, and clean. She wanted me invisible, forgotten, disposable. I stood there long enough to feel the shift, that split second where hurt turns into clarity. I lowered the gift bag slowly, took one final look at the hall, and stepped back without another word. Not because I accepted it, but because I knew something she didn't. This wasn't the end. It was the quiet before a very different kind of celebration. I walked back to my car without wiping my eyes. Let them see. Let them remember what it looked like when someone was thrown aside after funding the entire event, top to bottom. I didn't need to beg to be part of something I had literally built. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, not from anger, but from something colder, disappointment that sank deeper than rage. This wasn't just a party. It was supposed to be her graduation milestone, her fresh start. And I had worked overtime, skipped weekends, and even sold a few personal pieces of jewelry to make sure it all happened. She had called me 3 times, crying during planning, overwhelmed by vendors and deadlines. I solved each one, smiling through her panic, because I wanted her to feel special. I thought that's what family did. I remember saying, "Don't worry, sweetheart, I'll handle it all. Just enjoy your moment." And now, apparently, my presence would ruin it. "Not invited," she said, like I was a stranger who stumbled into someone else's party. But the venue contract? I signed it. The floros booked in my name. Even the dessert tower that everyone was taking selfies in front of, it was my idea. And yet, none of that mattered when she stood there with her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the door, blocking me like a security guard. I had been reduced to a transaction, not a person, not a woman who had sacrificed her own joy so someone else could smile. But as I stared into the rearview mirror, something hardened in me. If I wasn't welcome at the party I paid for, maybe it was time she learned who actually held the receipts and what power really looked like when you stopped using it for silence that night. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water I never touched, replaying her face, her tone, the way she had weaponized poise to disguise cruelty. I thought about the little girl I used to walk to school in scuffed up shoes, how she clung to my arm every time she was scared. I remembered the teenager who used to text me "thank you" after every school play I helped sew costumes for. Where had that girl gone? Or had she always seen me as temporary, as useful only when she needed things fixed? The pain didn't come in waves. It sat steady in my chest, like a heavy stone I couldn't cough out. I reached into the drawer, where I kept the event folder, every signed invoice, email, printout, budget spreadsheet. It was all there. And yet so was every birthday card I ever gave her. Every photo of us backstage or laughing in dressing rooms. I flipped through one from years ago where she had written, "You're the reason I believe in myself." I ran my thumb over that line and felt the sting of irony. Belief, it turned out, had an expiration date. I had always been the scaffolding. She just forgot to look back once the building was finished, but I wasn't crumbling. I wasn't going to beg for a chair at a table I had built. I may have been left at the door tonight, but doors swing both ways. And while she reveled in a celebration I paid for, she never once looked under the surface to see who had laid every brick. That would be her mistake. Because when you try to erase the architect, you often forget she still has the blueprints. The morning after the event, I received an automated thank you email from the venue. "We hope your celebration was a success," it read, along with a final invoice summary. It felt like a punch wrapped in politeness. I had paid in full. Deposits, overtime staff, even a rush fee for the last-minute stage adjustment she wanted. The ballroom coordinator had copied me on every detail because, in their eyes, I was the event owner. And they were right. The receipts weren't just digital. They were printed, stapled, neatly stacked in a manila folder still sitting on my desk. But the world that clapped for her last night had no idea. No one at that party knew who covered the violin trio or who fixed the venue's HVAC emergency. An hour before guests arrived, they only saw her speech, her smile, her curated spotlight. That's how she wanted it. Clean, untouched, free of history. As if events like that materialized from thin air, I opened the venue's message again and clicked reply. For a moment, I hovered over the keyboard. Should I say something? Should I ask if anyone noticed she'd changed the event name? At the last second, removing mine from the line that once read hosted by, I didn't write back. I didn't need to. The truth was already sitting in the files, but something shifted in me. Maybe I couldn't rewrite how she treated me, but I could choose what came next. I had legal ownership of everything that passed through that event, every permit, every signature, every vendor communication. And somewhere in those papers, I realized, was a power I hadn't yet used. She may have locked me out emotionally, but legally I was still inside the room. And that door wasn't closed yet. Later that week, I scheduled a quiet meeting with the event coordinator, not out of revenge, but clarity. I wanted to know exactly what had been changed in the final days, what permissions had been granted, and whether she had submitted any documents under her name. The woman, polite but clearly uncomfortable, flipped through her tablet and said, "Actually, all signatures remained under yours. She didn't submit any amendments." I nodded, unsurprised. That had always been her pattern. Step into the light once someone else turned it on. I requested full documentation and she emailed everything within the hour. It was all there, from the original booking with my initials to the last payment confirmation processed 2 days before the event. Every detail, every upgrade, every flower stem, every light fixture was tied to me. She had deleted me from the visible parts, but the foundation still bore my name. That evening, I gathered everything into a digital file: invoices, permits, messages, and even a few behind-the-scenes photos I had taken during setup. Not for legal action, not yet, but because erasure only works if you stay silent, and I was done with silence. I looked at the gala photo album she had posted online, dozens of pictures, polished captions, comments filled with admiration. She had written, "Couldn't have done it without my amazing team, but I wasn't in a single frame. Not one." That absence, more than anything, confirmed the truth. She hadn't forgotten me. She had erased me on purpose. And if she thought I would stay in the background again. Watching her collect praise on a stage I paid for, she was about to learn something new. Because this time, I wasn't just the funder. I was the witness. And witnesses keep records. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I knew that if I reached out, she'd either deflect with shallow politeness or weaponize guilt, like she'd done. Before, "I didn't mean it that way," she'd say. Or worse, "I was under a lot of stress." But I was done accepting stress as an excuse for disrespect. Instead, I called the caterer and requested a duplicate of the invoice, the one with my billing address and full payment confirmation. Then I called the decor company, the florist, even the AV technician who had adjusted the sound balance. After she complained about the echo, all of them confirmed the same thing: my name, my payments, my notes in the design briefs. I wasn't just involved, I was the architect. Yet not a single thank you had found its way to me. And still, part of me ached, not for the money, not even for the public dismissal, but because I had loved her, supported her, dreamed with her. I remembered all the late-night coffee runs, the voice memos she sent at midnight, the way she once leaned on me like a sister or daughter would. And now, she had turned me into a stranger on the sidewalk. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman too often used as a stepping stone. Sturdy, reliable, but no more. I printed a copy of every receipt and placed them in an envelope, not to confront her but to protect myself. Because when someone rewrites a story without you, sometimes the only way to reclaim your truth is to hold the proof. And I had it neatly labeled, undeniably clear. She may have taken the microphone that night, but I had just picked up the pen. The next week I received an invitation I hadn't expected. Not from her, of course, but from one of the event sponsors. It was a follow-up brunch, meant to celebrate the success of the gala and discuss future collaborations. My name was on the list. Hers wasn't. I stared at the email, stunned. Apparently, one of the representatives had asked who coordinated this so seamlessly, and the event staff gave them my name. Not hers, not the host. Me. The one they had seen scribbling notes during setup, answering calls, adjusting centerpieces without drawing attention. I considered declining, retreating into silence again, but something in me shifted. Why should I? Why disappear when the truth had already started speaking without me? So I replied, "I'll be there. Thank you for including me." On the morning of the brunch, I dressed without the usual second-guessing, no muted tones, no simple earrings. I wore the blazer I'd once considered too bold and walked in knowing I didn't have to prove anything. They greeted me with warmth. One woman even said, "We hoped you'd come, we were so impressed by your work." I smiled, not bitterly, but quietly, because they didn't know the story behind the scenes. They only knew the result, and for once, that was enough. As the conversation moved to upcoming events, someone asked if I'd be open to coordinating their next fundraiser. I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "but under my name this time." And there it was. Not vengeance, not drama. Just a clear declaration that I existed, I contributed, and I wouldn't be hidden anymore. She had tried to erase me in front of her guests. Now strangers were inviting me into rooms she'd never expected me to enter. Not as just the assistant, but as the woman who made it all happen after the brunch. I walked past the venue where the gala had taken place. It was empty now, just a quiet building with faint echoes of music and laughter still clinging to the windows. I paused at the front steps, remembering how I had stood just outside them the night she turned me away. The same steps where I had held that small gift bag with trembling hands. Now I stood taller. There was no bag, no expectation, no illusion. Just me, grounded. A woman who had once been desperate to be acknowledged, now realizing she didn't need permission to exist. I sat on the nearby bench, pulled out my phone, and opened the folder labeled Gala Records. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was history proof, power. I scrolled through the photos, the flowers I had chosen, the lighting design I approved, even the seating arrangement she claimed to have done alone. I remembered how she had said, "They don't need to know who helped. They only care about the face on stage." But they did care. At least the right ones did. Sponsors, vendors, coordinators, the ones who watched me work, who noticed the silent hands behind the scenes. For the first time in a long while, I felt something unexpected. Pride. Not the kind that seeks applause, but the quiet kind. The one that lives in knowing you were never invisible, only underestimated. I stood and walked away without looking back. The building didn't own my story. She didn't own my story. And as I moved down the street, I realized I had finally stepped out of the wings and into my own light. Not because someone handed it to me, but because I had carried it the whole time. That evening, I posted a single image on my personal account, a candid photo from the setup day, showing my hands adjusting the centerpiece under soft lighting. No caption, no hashtags, just a moment of truth. Within an hour, the comments began. "You did the rolls. Wait, weren't you the one organizing behind the scenes? Why weren't you mentioned? People noticed. Even the photographer from the event messaged me privately. You were everywhere that day. How come you weren't in the official album?" I didn't answer directly. I didn't need to. The silence she tried to bury me under was already cracking. One of her old friends, someone who had smiled at me awkwardly at the door, shared my photo with the words, "True grace looks like this." And suddenly the story was being told without my prompting. Truth has a rhythm of its own. It finds cracks, slips through filters, outlives spin. And she hadn't expected that. She had tried to control the narrative by locking the door, but the truth had never been inside the party. It had been walking away with quiet dignity, arms full of proof. That's the thing about being underestimated. It's not just insulting, it's tactical blindness. She didn't see me coming because she never looked beyond the role she assigned me. Just the assistant. She said it so easily, forgetting. That assistants remember everything. Who paid, who planned, who made it all happen when others froze. And now that memory had shape, voice, and yes, evidence. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to call. The message was already sent, quietly, firmly, and without bitterness. Just a photo, a truth, a woman reclaiming her space in the story. And this time, I wasn't waiting to be invited in. A few days later, she called. I saw her name flash on my screen and let it ring 4 times before I picked up. Her voice was soft, too soft, the kind people use when they're unsure whether to apologize or manipulate. "I saw your post," she said. "People are talking." I waited, giving her silence as her mirror. She sighed, then added, "I didn't mean to exclude you. It was just the moment. It was overwhelming." The word exclude rang louder than her tone, cold, deliberate. Dressed up as an accident? I had heard that kind of excuse before. Wrapped in stress, tied with a ribbon of performative regret. But this time, I didn't fill the silence for her. I didn't say, "It's okay," like I once would have. "Do you know I paid the audio technician extra because you wanted a specific entrance song?" I asked instead. Her breath caught. She didn't respond right away. I didn't know she started, but I cut her off gently. "That's the point. You didn't ask." And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not the public snub, Not even the dismissal, but the fact that she never once turned to see who held the ladder steady while she climbed. I could feel her shrinking through the phone, not from shame, but discomfort. She wasn't used to me speaking plainly. To me, letting the full weight of my absence press down where my presence had once lifted. "You were incredible," she said finally, like tossing a bone after the feast, but I didn't want praise anymore. I wanted presence, acknowledgement, partnership, things she either couldn't or wouldn't give. So I told her calmly, "This was your gala, but it was my investment, and next time I decide where that goes." After that call, something in me settled, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. I didn't cry. I didn't replay the conversation 100 times like I used to. Instead, I opened a new folder on my desktop titled Next Time and began drafting notes for future projects. Not with her, with people who saw me, who valued invisible labor, not because it made them look good, but because they understood its cost. I realized I had spent years orbiting her world, pouring my time, money, and energy into someone else's spotlight. And for what? A nod? Maybe? A line in a speech? A lukewarm thank you at the end of a crowded night? But those things were crumbs, and I was no longer hungry for scraps. I wanted full seats at full tables. I wanted to be invited in, not as a backup or a formality, but because my presence was essential. So I reached out to 2 of the sponsors from the gala, the ones who had quietly asked for my contact info afterward. We scheduled coffee meetings, nothing dramatic, just honest conversations about vision, value, and collaboration, and for the first time, I noticed how different it felt to walk into a room without needing to shrink, without wondering if my name would be left off the program. They called me the organizer, the lead, the decision maker, not assistant, not helper, not background. It was disorienting at first, but also freeing. Like stepping out of a too tight dress you'd worn for someone else's approval, I could breathe again. I wasn't chasing validation. I was building something on my own terms. And while she sat in her curated world of applause, I had started constructing one where I didn't need permission to be seen. About a week later, I received a formal invitation in the mail. Not from her, but from the same committee that hosted the gala. They were launching a new mentorship initiative and wanted me to speak at the opening session. Me, by name. No middleman, no back. They had seen what I brought to the table and wanted others to learn from it. I read the letter twice, then a third time, almost unable to believe how far I'd come from standing outside a closed door with a dress bag in my hand. I thought about how many times I'd been the silent engine behind someone else's big moment, the one who stitched things together, who made magic quietly and disappeared before the applause. But here it was, an acknowledgement, a seat, a microphone. I accepted. Not to prove anything to her, but to prove something to the version of myself who once believed invisibility was the price of being kind. It isn't. That belief was a lie. Kindness is not submission. Support doesn't mean silence. You can lift others without lowering yourself. And that night outside the venue, it wasn't my ending, it was my turning point. I stood in front of the mirror that evening and rehearsed a few lines of what I might say at the event. I didn't write a speech filled with bitterness or hidden jabs, just truth. Stories of building quietly, of being underestimated, of finally learning to name my worth out loud. As I looked at my reflection, I didn't see someone left out anymore. I saw a woman who had been holding the key all along, and finally decided to use it, not for revenge, but to open her own door. The night of the mentorship event, I arrived early, not because I was nervous, but because I finally understood the value of preparation when it's for yourself. The venue was elegant but simple. No chandeliers, no dramatic spotlight, just a room full of chairs, a soft-lit stage, and people who had shown up to listen. As I stood backstage, I glanced at the list of speakers. My name was printed clearly, second in the lineup, beneath the title, Lead Coordinator and Vision Architect. I smiled. That wasn't a title she ever gave me, but I had given it to myself. The room filled slowly and familiar faces began appearing. A few from the original gala, a few from the sponsor brunch, and even a woman I had once trained years ago who now ran her own nonprofit. When they called my name, I walked up calmly, not timid, not overly proud, just sure. I started not with facts, but with a story about a dress, a door, and a silence that said more than any words ever could. I didn't name her. I didn't need to. What mattered wasn't the person who pushed me out. It was the strength I had found stepping back in. I spoke about quiet work, about invisible labor, and about the cost of being the uncredited architect behind someone else's empire. And then I told them the truth. I had finally come to believe. Recognition is nice, but being unafraid to own your space, that's power. When I finished, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was steady, rising from people who understood, who had been there too. And in that moment, I knew I had shifted something. not just for myself, but for every silent builder who ever wondered if they mattered after the session. People came up to me, not for photos or praise, but for connection. One woman with silver streaks in her hair whispered, "I've been the silent one too. Thank you for saying it out loud." Another handed me a card and said, "Let's build something together, this time with your name on the front." I tucked their words into the pocket of my jacket like quiet medals, each one heavier than applause. As the room slowly emptied, I found a corner near the back and just watched. I wasn't in a rush. I didn't have to prove I belonged. I had already done that by showing up fully, unapologetically, and finally in my own narrative. My phone buzzed. It was a message from her. Just one line, "I heard about tonight. Congratulations." No emoji, no attempt to ask if she could call. Just a sentence sitting between pride and distance. I didn't reply. Not from spite, but from peace, because I realized I no longer needed her recognition to feel seen. I had spent so long believing. Closure came from others that it had to be spoken, delivered, framed in mutual understanding. But sometimes closure isn't a conversation, it's a decision, a soft one. Like closing a book and placing it on a shelf you no longer revisit. I smiled quietly and put my phone away. I didn't owe her a reply. I didn't owe anyone a performance of grace. I had done the work. I had endured the silence, and now I was living the answer in full view, in my own voice, in rooms I once thought were locked. She had her gala, but I had my moment, and I wasn't asking for entry anymore. I was choosing where to go next. Later that night, I walked home instead of calling a car. The city lights flickered softly, and the cool air felt like a reset. I passed a boutique and saw a dress in the window. Long, deep green, simple but elegant. The kind of dress I once would have picked out for her, holding it up to the light and imagining how it might look when the spotlight hit. But this time, I imagined it on me. I stood there for a moment, then stepped inside and tried it on. It fit not just my body, but the version of me I had been becoming. I bought it, not for an event, not for anyone else, just for me. A symbol, maybe, or just a quiet promise that from now on, I would stop handing over things I hadn't even claimed for myself. That night, as I hung the dress in my closet, I thought about all the times I had been erased by the very hands I was lifting. All. The doors that closed while I waited on the steps, and how none of that could ever define me again, because I had built something stronger than credit or applause. I had built self-trust, and that can't be taken away. Not by someone else's spotlight. Not by silence. Not even by the temptation to prove myself. I looked at the dress once more, then turned off the light and let the quiet hold me. Not as absence, but as peace. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to be thanked publicly. I just needed to know I was done asking to be seen. From now on, if I showed up, it would be by choice. And if the door was locked again, I'd walk right past it.